Welcome everyone who's tuning in live for our discussion on understanding new ed data, and then a conversation on Generation Z. Let's see. Just a quick reminder before we get some logistical items. Make sure you join the conversation in NEA Ed Communities. Ed Communities is a social networking site for educators. Resources and the recording of this webinar are available only in this private group, and this group is called the All Things Membership Report. This webinar is being recorded for those who cannot attend this live version. We also welcome participation in many forms, so feel free to ask a question electronically by clicking on the Q&A button. This is also helpful to those who might not have a camera and a microphone, so you can ask your questions there. If you'd like to ask a question live, raise your hand. There should be a button down there to raise your hand, and we'll try to get to your questions. But please state your name and local association too for participants in this webinar. And then I need to state too that this webinar is a series, or this webinar and series is intended for UEA and local presidents, leadership, staff, and even building leaders / association leaders, but should not be distributed outside of UEA's network. So I apologize, Fran Lynn couldn't come today due to a personal conflict, but she does send her regrets. My name's William Spiegel. I'm a UniServ specialist working in membership and organizing on the growth and strength of our organization. This picture of me is actually from a trip I took a couple years ago to Japan. I just finished up at a sushi conveyor belt. It was probably the greatest day of my life. But New Ed is one of those campaigns that UEA does for membership in. New Ed is a partnership with the National Education Association and a challenge to meet one-on-one with new hires and new teachers throughout the state at our new teacher orientations and in our classrooms, collecting their interests and what resources they might need. We really collect that in two ways. If a potential member is ready to join now, we collect that data on the back of the membership application. You may have noticed that those extra questions on the back of your local's application, but we also collect data from those who might not be ready to join now by the new teacher card. The card also collects their contact information, not to data mine or spam, but so that we can know what school and work site they're headed to. So there's two methods of tracking the new ed data. In essence, here's what those new teacher cards is collecting. First is really getting at what tools and trainings they'd like to hear more about, that we actually have those resources to do within UEA and our locals. Classroom management, so we're talking student behavior, building relationships with our students, and keeping students on task. Resources for lesson planning, working with mentors and coaches, working with families, collaborating with administrators and our colleagues, and then evaluations and observations. The second piece is which issues are most important to them. So is it social and racial justice, meeting the needs of students in poverty, family and community engagement, and then fully funding our schools. And then the last two are really important too, and there's a difference between them. Education policy is really getting at how policies are made that are really create critical decisions affecting my students as a teacher, my school, and then the district. While political advocacy is more getting at supporting education policies to ensure that all students have opportunities to succeed. So there's a little bit of a difference there. And then finally, what topics are they more interested in learning about so that we can adjust our resources and trainings? Is it salary, educator rights and responsibilities, healthcare, pension, student debt, stretching your paycheck, or even working conditions? So those are the key components that we're really collecting on those new teacher cards. So here's what we know from the launch of the campaign. We've tracked more than 250 one-on-one conversations through the campaign. We are still processing membership applications and new teacher cards. So we do have some more work on meeting new teachers in our classrooms. So you can see on the chart that last year, I think we ended the campaign with more than 700 one-on-one conversations. I do have some more applications and stuff and new teacher cards to process. But so far, the #1 and 2 interests for our new teachers that they're indicating is salary and educator rights. And there's a lot happening right now in regards to salary, right? Actually, the local leadership of the Duchesne Education Association, DEA, and I were speaking with USU students from the Uinta Basin just on Monday. And I kind of came in thinking that they wouldn't want to talk about school funding or teacher salary issues, but they actually asked some really good questions about how education is funding, and were genuinely interested in knowing more about the tax reform process and how it's going to impact their salary for the teaching profession. I'm making the connection that this is a great time and opportunity for us to talk with our new colleagues in our buildings about how the association, how we advocate for conditions that retain high quality educators in advocating for salary and rights. So I also wanted to briefly share the data at a national level too. So nationwide, there have been more than 21,000 conversations happening. Over to the top left, I think on your screen, shows the top affiliates by engaged locals. So in Michigan, imagine having 458 local associations. Compare that to the 42 that we have in UEA. That's a lot of local affiliates engaging in the campaign. But Utah does join the nation in meeting one-on-one with our new teachers. So on a national scale, classroom management is the #1 tool and tool training that educators are identifying. And then after that is family and community engagement. So salary and educator rights are still in the top 5, but more in the bottom of the top 5 compared to Utah's interests in salary. So we at UEA actually don't survey and recruit education support professionals. Those are our aides, support staff, janitors, and custodial workers. And we actually don't survey and have membership in higher ed as well. But it is still interesting to see where they're at professionally in their interests. Pensions for ESP support professionals was #1, and then education policy for our higher ed educator members nationwide. So I do want to point you in the direction of our new ed website, which has additional resources and support to help you as staff, local leaders, and your local councils and boards in strategizing the best ways to meet one-on-one with new hires and collect their interest through the new teacher cards. To find it, you just log into the members only website and then click on the Leader Resources tab at the very top for the new ed back to school campaign and other UEA membership campaigns. We're also doing 2 Amazon Kindle Fire raffles. The first in August, which we just finished. We do that really after our NTOs, and then another one at the end of the campaign in November. I don't have a picture yet, but congrats to the new teacher in Alpine School District who won the first Amazon Kindle Fire too. So make sure as we're talking with the new colleagues in our buildings that we're sharing how we can better support them, or sharing how we can better support them enters them in for that drawing of the last Kindle Fire too. On the website is a handout for new teachers on retirement, the benefits of collective bargaining, and then we've got a thing for staff on NTO best practices. So we welcome you to check those out. And then these are just some fun pictures of leadership and staff who've gone out to welcome to the new teacher to the profession and congratulate them on receiving that Amazon Kindle Fire too. But before we move on to the next presenter, I wanted to share the Economic Policy Institute a couple years ago put out some research on association and union memberships reemergence in the US. In fact, NEA is back at the more than 300 million membership mark, which is huge. So we're seeing this new reemergence. The Policy Institute indicated that 75% of this increase came from young people. And I'm talking Generation Z and most millennials, 16 to about 35. But research also is telling us that young people hold the most favorable attitudes towards labor of any generation, and their support for pro-worker policies, regardless of their which political side they come from. Which should ease actually any hesitation of us going out to meet one-on-one with our new colleagues. So I'll let the next presenter introduce herself, but I'm also excited to share her success in passing the praxis, or at least the first step towards graduating. So here's Hallie Caldwell.
Thank you, William. I am super excited about passing my last praxis. It was a lot of stress, but not as bad as I thought it would be. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to present this research about Generation Z. I am a student at Western Governors University, and I will start my student teaching after the holidays. So I'm excited to already be involved with UEA and
on the council.
Yeah, and to be on the council. It has been an incredible experience, and I am grateful to have this opportunity. But let's get started with Generation Z. What is their deal? Okay, because they are different than the generations before them. Being born into technology is something we haven't seen before. So these are the people in our population who were born between 1996 and 2009, and being raised to adulthood in that time, they've seen a lot of disruption, the economic disruption of the Great Recession. They've grown up with numerous school shootings and the psychological effects of that on children. But every generation, it seems like, has had a significant event that they kind of remember throughout their lives. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the baby boomers, they all remember when JFK was shot. Generation X, it was the Challenger explosion. And for the millennials, it was the Twin Towers of 9/11. So what we're seeing so far, can't predict the future, but so far the big thing for this Generation Z has been the election of 2016. It was a really big deal, and it was just kind of this unprecedented thing, without getting into politics, of this, television show host and businessman without any military or political previous background became the president of the United States, and just the way that he's utilized social media. So they were born, like I said before, they were born into technology, and that's kind of played an important role in their development. We've seen from studies that they're very visually dependent. Kind of like how you would write down an important date in your calendar to remember it, we're seeing that they are taking pictures to remember different things that happened. For example, the study showed that one girl had a hard time remembering her Sweet 16 party until she pulled the pictures of it up, and then it all came flooding back to her. But keep in mind, these are people who have had documentation of moments after birth to the present time. Not only can they tell you the day of their first steps, but they can show you what their first word was, because they probably have it on video. But because of that, they are very visually dependent, and they're used to sorting through vast amounts of information. These are the young adults who grew up with Google at their fingertips. They could ask any question, and then they had to figure out where the answers were. And then they also had to start competing at an early age, not just academically with, preschools with years-long wait lists, But also, you have 3 or 4-year-olds who are on competitive soccer teams, and let's not forget toddlers and tiaras or dance moms, all those competitions. But we're also seeing that Gen Z is part of a global community. Never before has a generation been able to talk across the world simultaneously and share videos, and it's created a lot of empathy for different situations. And so we have this generation of social activists, and then they also understand their ability to create change. Recently, there's been the Amazon walkout where their employees decided that they didn't like Amazon's environmental policies, and they walked out to change that. But another really good example of social activism is Malala. And if you haven't heard, you've probably heard of her, but if you haven't, she's a member of Generation Z. And as a young girl, there were gender roles and societal norms that she was expected to follow, and the Taliban decided that when they invaded her village, they were going to prevent the young women from attending school. And so Malala, she first gave a speech in Pakistan about this situation, and then she became a blogger for the BBC. And the Taliban found her and attacked her when she was on a school bus. But she didn't stop voicing what was happening and trying to become an advocate for those who couldn't advocate for themselves. And she actually was given the Nobel Peace Prize at age 17. And she was also given the highest honor that a person can receive from the United Nations. So just incredible things happening because of Generation Z. They are also pride themselves on being individualistic. You don't have as much those kids who are trying to fit in like everyone around them. They're under a lot less pressure to conform, and they're looking for opportunities to find ways to be successful in ways that work for them. So because there hasn't been generations this far along in technology, they're finding that they have to create their own path. So that's just one thing that we're seeing. Speaking of creating your own path, this is Karina Garcia, and she is YouTube's slime queen. So she's a little bit on the older end of Generation Z, but she is an individual that has made her fortune, and we're talking $23,000 a month from making slime on YouTube. And she doesn't even have to sell the slime that she creates. She just gets her money from corporate sponsorship deals, and we're talking about Disney, and Coca-Cola is another example. But it just goes to show that Generation Z is finding ways to create their own niche and make themselves successful. They do this because they're really competitive, and they've had to be competitive from a very early age. And because of this, they have to be producers and not just consumers. We're seeing that whereas millennials, it was almost delayed adulthood. Well, now we've got Generation Z where it's early adulthood, and you can see this with teenage CEOs and like preteen CEOs too. And I know this is really small, so I'm just gonna kind of give a little rundown. So the first example is Noah Mintz, and some of you, maybe Generation X, have heard of the Babysitters Club, because there were those books, the Babysitters Club. But this is when she was 12, she launched a New York nanny agency, and she's making over $300,000 a year. And when she was 15, it became so much. She was forced to hire a CEO because she was working 40 hours a week and still trying to keep up with the 8th grade. Crazy. And then there's another boy, Mosiah Bridges, and he recently, he started a bow tie company when he was 9. And just 6 years later, he was able to get a 7-figure licensing partnership with the NBA for his bow ties. So it just goes to show, like, Generation Z is using their individuality and their competitive nature and going for it, finding what works for them. But they're also looking to create new solutions for meaningful change. There's this girl, Michaela, and she wanted to make a product for a children's business competition that she was going in. She used her grandma's recipe for flaxseed lemonade and invested a portion of the profits for organizations dedicated to saving honeybees. So just really cool stuff like that. And now that recipe's gotten awards and is also featured at Whole Foods. And now she's leading workshops. She's 13 years old now, mind you. She's leading workshops on how to save the honeybees, and she's also participating in social entrepreneurship panels.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think this question that you might not be able to see is really important.
Yeah.
Especially for our organization. And it says, will they be given the opportunity to bring these talents and tendencies to your organization, or will they be dismissed for being too young and inexperienced? I think that's a really good reflective piece for our organization.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
No, I'm glad that you brought that up. And I remember I left that there for a reason. But yeah, because I mean, if 9-year-olds can start organizations and 13-year-olds can be CEOs, it just goes to show that you can't just dismiss people, that everybody brings something to the table, and it's important to remember that. So these are just some statistics going to show kind of what Generation Z is like as far as team building. They're very independent. They like to manage people, and like I mentioned before, a lot of them learn by listening, or they don't learn by listening, they learn by watching. Very visually oriented. So some of their needs. So the first need is understanding, and I've got some information here from a statistic. It says 91% of students, and this was in 2011, grades 5 through 12 stated that their mind never stops. And I think that those who aren't maybe in Generation Z need to remember this and just offer understanding, and maybe keep that in mind, and maybe adjust work environment or maybe approach when incorporating Generation Z members. Generation Z also enjoys problem solving and loves challenges. And they get great satisfaction from overcoming these challenges, as you can see by the 11-year-old CEO. So they also enjoy structures structure and goals with which to measure their progress. Because they have that mind going all the time, it's important that they receive help and support as well. There's anxiety and depression on the rise, and studies have been showing that they have a harder time recognizing when they're getting burned out. And going along with that understanding, it might be helpful for someone to say, hey, let's take a break, because they're not as able to do that because of that competitive nature. So what's their deal? So kind of wrapping it up, Generation Z has been raised with an individualistic, realistic, and competitive nature. They've been taught the skills to successfully defy the norm. We'll see the pendulum shift from collaborative workplaces towards more widespread demand for and pursuit of leadership development. I just wanted to say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to present this research, and I just wanted to say thank you all for your time. And if you have any questions, just feel free to contact me.
Great job, Erin. That's awesome. Any questions that we can answer right now? Seeing none, just to wrap up, the next kind of series we're looking at after a little break to relaunch in spring for the Leadership Capacity Building webinar series. I'm looking at January 22nd for the story of our organization and education political advocacy to get us in gear for the 45-day legislative session coming up. And then I'm looking into resources for social media organizing and helping local associations build their online digital capacity as well. So we'll wrap up this session, but if you have any questions, feel free to ask them on the Ed Communities group, All Things Membership Report, and we'll see you online. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Awesome.